Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is July 31, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Nick Ripatrazone. Wait, I'm going to blow this. I want to get it right. Ripatrazone.
There you go.
Okay, you say it once.
Ripatrazone.
Ripatrazone. I know somebody said Ripatrazone. I like that. Ripatrazone. Okay, where in the heck you calling in from, Nick?
I am in northwest New Jersey, so the forest area of New Jersey.
Very cool. What's the best thing for a human being?
Love.
Yep, that's the answer I get a lot. What's your, what's your favorite? I agree. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Ooh. I was reared on, I guess, books. I don't know if I ultimately think it's the best form of information. I think it's, for me, the most nostalgic and comforting. It's the most
Yeah.
texture based. I like digital things. I like TV, but I don't feel it in the same way that I kind of encounter literature. So I would say ultimately books.
You're good with words, dude. I appreciate it. So, did you become a reader because your parents were reading as an example? Told you to read or on your own?
They certainly, there was a lot of books in the house, and my mother was and still is a great storyteller, and my dad was a football playing theologian. So there was an interesting kind of mixture of literary and theological background in the house. And we love movies, and we would be watching movies all the time. And so the idea of me becoming a reader, what was almost natural. I
Yeah.
grew up on the Twilight Zone. I grew up on In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. I was always interested in sort of the paranormal and how we're sort of the supernormal, the extra normal. And I think reading was a way for my imagination to kind of venture down those pathways.
Did you listen to Coast, the radio show?
I listened to it this afternoon, an old broadcast with our bell. Yeah,
Okay.
I
Okay, so um why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think we're compelled to forage naturally. I mean, the same way that I went picking for berries yesterday morning, I want to go through the archives and go through microfilm, go through books and walk among the stacks of a library. Like, I think we like to journey, and I think that sometimes we do that for calisthenic purposes, and other times we do it because it's fun to learn and to understand things. I think it's inevitable that we want to do that.
Really good. So you sort of answered this, but I'll ask it anyways. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate
Yeah.
because I think, I mean, we see with kids how many questions they ask. I mean, they're compelled to discover and be curious and to reject um, perhaps the first explanation that's given to them. So I think it's tamped down in us as time goes on, unfortunately,
Wait,
by
what's the verb?
like tamped down
T like temptation?
or tamped, as in like when you use a tamp to like to
How do you
flatten
spell
the.
how do you spell that word?
I think it's TAMPED.
Tamped down. That's a
Yeah,
great word. That is a cool word. Okay, so um well, how old are your daughters now?
they're 9
Oh, so they're asking questions all the time.
all the time.
Wow. So do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, I think thoughts follow emotions at some level. I think that those things overlap. I don't know if they are necessarily separate. Um,
Yeah.
I find myself, I guess with each day becoming more open to the idea that the emotional brain is possibly the superior one. So
Wow. Yeah, that's good. See, I like when people change the verbs or adjust the question. Your thoughts create emotions that follow. So that was good. So I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
sleep on it.
Nice. Can humans think without language?
I think so. Because I think language is fallible and it's fun to see what it can do, but it can't do everything.
Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do
Mm.
you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
I actually think language off or typically doesn't work. I think that we have to do so much explaining about how we feel and clarifying of ourselves in any given day, in like the minutia of everyday interaction and the way we talk about when we have intense emotions, that I think we're actually as beings pretty good with dealing with a tool like language that isn't that perfect.
Yeah,
And I think poetry as a medium is our attempt to refine it and try it out and make it workable.
that's good. Yeah, I like my friend was that's Americans talk in half sentences. He goes, deal with it. I like your word, we deal with it. Basically, you're saying if language breaks down, go write a poem or
Yeah,
go read a poem.
read a poem is a good practice. Yeah.
Your observations of humans in general. I know it's both and stupid question. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings? You've sort of answered it, but what's your observation of humans in general?
I think I think ultimately we're feeling beings. I mean, when I cry, I don't think I cry because I'm thinking in an intellectual sense. I think maybe it was something intellectual that precipitated it, but I think the tears come from sort of a feeling place. So I tend to use that as a gauge um, when
That's
we're
good.
pushed to our sentimental border. How what we are at our core. So I would ultimately say feeling.
Wow, this is a question I've shelved for years, but you really evoked it. When was the last time you cried and why? Or,
Yeah,
you can you name one,
yeah. The
doesn't
last
have to be the
time
last time.
I'll tell you the last time actually. It was the not the most recent episode of the show Better Call Saul, but the second most recent one. There was an opening montage with a very kind of melancholy song, and I just really connected with it, and I sort of let myself go and into memories and the past and went there and cried a little bit. It was effective.
Songs, amazing what songs can do. Yeah, cry. That's good.
Mhm.
Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Hmm. I actually have never thought of the soul in that manner. Um, I would say that thinking is what we do to try to sort out the world in front of us, to seek patterns. And I think the soul is comforted by patterns. If I'm running down a path and there's multiple trees of the same type, that comforts me. Um, that feels like a soul moment, but also maybe it's intellectual.
Yeah. His second question was, can machines think?
Oh, we're about to find out, I think. Um, I think machines do something that looks like thinking, and I believe that humans seek to create the outside world in our own image, to believe that a light in the distance, is a manned or alien driven craft, like that comforts us rather than it being something that we can't understand. So I think we humanize things, and that could include machines.
Good word, humanize. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think happiness is better because I think meaning can get a little tricky. And maybe I'm using like meaning in an annotation, like a literary sense. Perhaps that isn't what you intend in the phrase. I mean, I think happiness is one of the ultimate goals because there's some sort of contentment. And, I hope it's not cheating to say that those things overlap ultimately for a lot of people. And for me, myself, happiness and meaning.
Yeah, there's no cheating. It's again, it's wordplay, and it's the key, Nick, is that you put the questions into the context you want, because it's funny. I got that question from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, because meaning lasts and happiness doesn't necessarily last.
Right.
So that was good how you does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think it depends on the situation. I think there's something that exists, and I think we tend to frame situations or experiences in our life in a way that is radically different from people even who are close to us, who are not us. So I think there's an active participation in that. And, we're talking right now pretty far in terms of mileage from each other. And we are in the same kind of noosphere in the Teilhard sense, but, there's something unique going individually with us and our interpretation. So I think that matters.
It's really good. Yeah, I feel close to you. It's like I've done this for 40 years and I always insisted it be in person. And now the Zooms are better. I'm telling you. I mean, all my events that I've held for years are better on Zoom. I'm sorry, people don't want to hear that, but people are more attentive. They don't have to go park, and I don't have to set up chairs.
That's true.
So, but it's amazing how this interview, like yesterday, the guy was in, I don't know, Spain and, all over the place. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Thought.
Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tool. What new tool do you suggest?
I don't know if it's new. I mean, it's cribbing from McLuhan a little bit, but I think we need to look at the environment that surrounds any medium that we encounter. And, you just made a point that speaks to that with the idea of Zoom being a more immediate and almost strangely practical connective medium. Whereas, when you drive somewhere to have a meeting, like you say, you have to worry about traffic, you have to worry about parking. There's certain things that we don't have to worry about. And so I would say the tool of that environment perception is essential.
Really key. Did you really, it seems, you got McLuhan. McLuhan's hard to get. And I don't want to sound elitist, but a lot of people, and McLuhan's fine saying, hey, half truth is still a lot of truth. The thing about Woody Allen making McLuhan change the question, to change the question. Do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong? To a statement, you mean my whole fallacy is wrong. Did you know that?
I've heard that, but that's fascinating.
Anyways, it's not really known, but it's like he exposed McLuhan to the world, made Rian Johnson inspired him to make films.
Wow.
And that scene alone. And so what? A half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So what? He got him half right. Big deal. That's a good. But it is you seem to be one like Janine Marchusat. You ever read Cosmic Media? Her book on
Yes.
Yeah, she took 13 years. She really got McLuhan, and we were like, "Whoa, where'd she come from?" Cavell too. What's the Cavell's book? Something not. Oh, anyways, he's another one. Richard Cavell's books. Have you read his books?
I haven't.
Yeah, he's another one. He really got it. So, all the power to you. You did. Bravo. You're really articulate. So, what new toy do you suggest?
Some sort of a dream recorder. I want to
You
get.
mean it doesn't exist, or you wish it would exist?
I don't think it exists yet, at least in a way that is searchable.
It's called memory. My friend years ago said someday we'll be able to, hit a button and have the song play like that. It came true. Boom. We don't have to find tape and I says, we already got that. It's your head. You can have a song go in your head. No, I like that idea. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
If the bears are going to get too close to our house.
Literally, you live
literally.
Bears are gonna, that is great. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. So, by artists, I mean poets, filmmakers, athletes, whatever. They're broadcasting they're broadcasting these hidden psychic effects of our environment, of our inventions, like the environment, that they're broadcasting them to us so that we could learn to cope with what we don't like about the invention. But humans ignore them. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, the way that you described it is not how we perhaps want to receive the information from those sources. Like we perhaps seek to be entertained by them, and we see entertainment as passive, mundane, and simple. Whereas McLuhan's riding around England going for his PhD, reading Gerard Manley Hopkins, Jesuit priest poet, who I think is one of the most radically important writers ever, and who maybe most people aren't entertained by, but certainly when Hopkins described a Windhover, like the falcon in the air, just frozen up there, that is an example poetically of understanding the environment in a way that other people didn't. So I don't think most people want to, not that they don't want to do the work, they don't know that the work has to be done, perhaps, and that's okay, because for a lot of people, they're super busy, and it's not something that comes up.
Right.
And that's why we need to slow things down, why we need to read poetry, why we need to go for walks. Like those things help bring out those psychic energies as you describe them.
Good. Are you certain Marshall started reading Hopkins at Cambridge, or you're guessing, or you're sort of saying, do you know for certain he wasn't reading him earlier?
He was likely reading him earlier. He describes reading Pied Beauty on a bike ride at Cambridge. But I think he dug into, or he dipped into him a little bit prior to his PhD time. But certainly while he was studying there, that's when he really latched on to Hopkins and then, of course, Joyce as his kind of exemplar.
Yeah. You gotta, I want you to meet Richard Altman. What's that town that McLuhan was raised in? Winnipeg.
Mhm.
Have you seen all the research he's done on McLuhan in Winnipeg?
No.
Oh, it's fascinating,
Mm.
and it's like super experimental film.
Mm.
But the thing you brought up, I want to bring up now because it's appropriate. Because you're a professor too, right? Yeah,
I actually teach high school and college. Yeah.
high school and college. So
Mm.
here's McLuhan in '57.
Mm.
It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. This distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases.
Mm.
However, it's always been true whatever pleases teaches more
Mm.
effectively. So you're just nodding away. You don't even need word. We don't need no stinking words. But it's like so heavy because what he's saying is true, pleases, teaches more effectively. Well, what does more effectively mean? Because
Mm.
you've learned to be smart by being raised by smart people. Went to school, you paid attention, you did your homework. But were you always learning more effectively because that pleased you? I mean, please is a weird word
Mm.
because you also said, "Oh, I sat around and watched movies with my parents."
Mhm.
But that's a family ritual and it's pleasing. But did they say, "Okay, no, go do your homework. Go write some poems, Nick." So just suss out that word pleases because you've already insinuated before you start nodding your head.
Yeah. Well, I think McLuhan, before understanding media happened in book form, it was a Ford Foundation research project that McLuhan pitched and helmed, ostensibly to change the way that media is taught in high schools. And McLuhan had this grand vision for secondary education. Now, McLuhan never taught high school, and obviously, in a lot of educational theories, their practice in real life has to be modified a little bit. But he came up with this report, and he actually was, as with everything else, was incredibly prescient as to what um, education delivered from a distance could do, and how education delivered through a screen could change us. The screen is an event. It's like a guest speaker. It's not just a static kind of experience. So when he uses the word, I mean, first of all, as certainly he was a poet artist who happened to be a theorist, and he's speaking in poetry when he says pleases teaches. But I think the pleasure comes from the engagement, and I think it's either the material that teaches us or it's the persona of the individual, the performer in front of us. And probably the better teachers are actors and actresses, at some level, and they don't take themselves too seriously, um, but they take education seriously. So that's the sweet spot.
But should teachers, I've talked to people about this, should teachers be taught performance, public speaking? And a couple of teachers say, no, I wasn't taught that. And it's almost like, well, why aren't they being taught?
Hmm.
Anyways,
Well,
that
I,
was
I never I never took a single education course in my life. I went into teaching in what's called the alternate route. So I only
Well,
studied literature, and then just
but
kind of
did you ever study acting?
no, but I'm Italian, so we always act.
That was a great statement. And you're from New Jersey. Sheesh. We always that's like Bleecker Bob, uh, great record salesman to all the rock stars. He says, "I'm not an asshole, I'm from New York."
That's good.
Do artists have moral obligation?
That's a fantastic question that isn't asked as much as it used to be. John Gardner's On Moral Fiction from I think 1979. He asked that question and made a lot of people mad by his conclusion, which was that you could be moral, you can be maybe a little immoral, but you probably shouldn't be amoral, the absence of morality. And I tend to align myself with that. I think it's dangerous to have purely didactic art or writing, because I think art is necessarily messy and uncomfortable sometimes, and to use a McLuhan word, probing. Like it should have those. It should kind of set us off kilter a little bit.
Yeah.
I do think. I think a lot of great artists, they're on the border of like the profane and the sacred, and they realize that there's probably like a porous border between those two things.
Profane and what's the other word?
Sacred.
That's my mantra is great art should up your shit up and go, I can do that. Like Jackson Pollock, I can do that. But it should go like, what the?
Mm-hmm.
But it's all right when art, comforts you and makes you feel fuzzy and nice. Mm-hmm. It's all right. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think old ideas, in the sense that if I find one that I haven't been fully immersed in, it's kind of like it's a haunting. Like it's a hidden thing. And I mean, I think, at least coming from the world of like reading, that it's really positive to read extremely contemporary things, and that things that are so old that contextually we're sort of confused by, and to find like the synthesis between them.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
I think so, because there's so many storytellers, I guess you can say, in my family. There's like a cryptomnesia result where I don't always know if I experienced it or if I was told it or if I read it, and they overlap. So there was this story that my oldest brother told me, walking down, because I grew up at the bottom of a hill, and he's walking down from the top of the hill where the bus dropped him off, and he noticed that my grandfather was in the driveway staring up at the sky. So he followed my grandfather's eyes, and there was a silver UFO in the sky. And so my brother started running down the hill. And by the time he got to the bottom of the hill, and sort of was able to lock eyes with our grandfather, the thing that was above was gone. And because that hill was a place that I would go running up and down and sledding up and down, like it was kind of my space, my experience mixed with that memory from my oldest brother, to the point where, even as I'm telling you, I'm remembering it for me. So to me, that's one of my earliest like formative memories, which was loaned to me and then perhaps ultimately given to me by him.
Great words, Nick. Beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
um, I want to say it's a blessing because it lets us live again.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, like a role model, and what specifically was the impact?
Well, one example in my family was my dad, who, like me, was considering entering seminary. But it's a good thing he didn't, because I probably wouldn't exist perhaps in this form. And he studied theology and was taught and trained by the Jesuits, who also taught / made Joyce mad, which is always the best combination to sort of be formed by that.
This is he aspired to be a Catholic priest.
Yes, he was
Yeah.
going to be a Jesuit, and
Yeah.
and when I was in college, my first 2 years, I was strongly considering it as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not. So what do you think you got if you had to summarize? What'd you get from your dad? What's like the core?
Being driven towards ambiguity and mystery.
Ah, that is amazing. Driven to ambiguity.
Mhm.
Yeah, Robert Dobbs says ambiguity is a sign of human maturity. I
That's right.
told that to my dad once, and he went, "Yeah, that's right."
That makes a lot of sense.
Ambiguity. What a great word. I'm ambiguous about ambiguity, but outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on it. Same question.
Uh, One of my high school social studies teachers, um, was he gave me the opportunity to do a 3-year independent study in school on the paranormal. So I was in high school, but I was studying like propulsion systems and reading Project Blue Book files and talking about spontaneous combustion. And the fact
Wow.
that he did that was everything for me, because it it played to my curiosities, but it also said like this is worthy of studying. So
And he did it was totally okay. It was a public school or as a Catholic school?
public school with a lot of Catholics.
But he didn't get in trouble. It was fine.
No,
That's great.
yeah,
What amazing. So you're raised a particular religion. Did you ever check out, or you've stayed practicing your whole life?
I'm still there.
Do you
Yeah,
pray?
yeah.
If God exists, what do you want God to say to you after you die?
They're gonna come to see you too.
Wait, they are going to come to see you too. Meaning, who's the they there?
Whoever I love who's not there yet.
Oh, they are going to come and see you too. The people who haven't died yet. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's really good. You know what 80% of people say?
What
You
is
did
it?
a good job. I mean, it's like it's really funny how I'm able to get this generalization. It's
Mm.
unfair because I don't write it down. It's just memory. But one guy said a couple months ago, he goes, "I checked here. We made a mistake. You're going back." Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I talk about this with my wife all the time. um, I in my writing, I do a lot of academic research into exorcisms and the devil, and I write about it a lot, and it definitely scares me, and I do have nightmares, but I think that there's evil. There's an evil force. I think that it can be invited in and cultivated to cause pain to others. And I remember William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, said, "If you look for the devil, you'll find him," which I think he interpreted that, if you think that something is evil or devilish, that you'll find it there. But I also, from like a language perspective, I like that sentence because that means that he can be found. So
That's Blake. We become what we behold. I mean, you invent a word for it. You manifested it.
mm-hmm.
But this is really good. You anticipate a lot of questions. I'm glad you brought up Freakin' too. I actually changed one of my questions because of Freakin', but that's upcoming. How do you, Nick, advise someone to deal with an enemy? This one I'll set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Bellini says, I need an enemy. And here's the bonus one I just got, Walt Whitman. I no doubt deserve my enemies. That's a smart guy.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you specifically react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I interpret that as you allow them to occupy emotion and space, and that's a victory if you view it as a combative enterprise.
What's combative enterprise mean?
The idea that you're in a battle with your enemy, whether it's emotional or spiritual or intellectual or
right.
Yeah.
But so that's interrupt. But that I'm going to interrupt again. That's like Duchamp saying there's no solution because there's no problem. Is that mamby-pamby Pollyannism, or is that?
Well, I mean, inevitably you're going to be in conflict with people if you exist outside of a remote location. And then if you lived in a remote location, you'd be in conflict with the environment. So there's conflict is inevitable. So I think the question is, what is your goal in existence? If your goal in existence is to seek power, then you will inevitably conflict yourself against people all the time because everyone or many people want power. If your goal in life is happiness, then the people with whom you conflict are perhaps those who are in between you and that happiness. And I think it's a question. I mean, whenever I think of, we brought up the idea of Italians as actors. Italians are also, writ large, a rather skeptical people, but also very sentimental people. And when you mix those two things, you get fights and enemies. But you also have a way of dealing with it, of being kind of cunning and sly and knowing when to walk away and focus your energy elsewhere.
It's good. I'm obsessed sort of with how the mob had their hands in rock and roll. And Nancy Sinatra was asked, when did the mob enter the music business? She goes, honey, we invented the music business. The other one is Don Rickles' documentary. He says, yeah, I liked Vegas when it was run by the mob. Now it's run by corporations and it sucks. That's what you're saying. The mob is like skeptical and sentimental, but I mean, not to say all Italians are mob, sorry. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
Well, because life is both the experience of being a human, like interacting with people, but life is also memory and confusion and desire and dreams. So if it's multifaceted and has multiple threads, then one of those facets and threads is storytelling, right? And film is one of those opportunities. When you think of the film experience, like you use the word projector. I mean, it's different now, of course, when you're watching something that's like projected onto you. But the classic, perhaps, film was, it's up there behind you and is being projected over your shoulder, and you're in a way projecting with it and looking at it. So there's this kind of weird visual break. I find people are more focused sometimes, and this might include younger people, when it's a film narrative than perhaps actual existence, because I feel like they have to work for it a little bit more, and there's a magic in film that some people don't see in life. It's like the novel by Walker Percy, The Moviegoer. This idea that things didn't exist in his life, real places, until he saw them in movies, and then they were certified, he said. So I'm definitely an adherent to Percy, has vision of film.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, Orson Bean said, "Movies saved my life."
Mm.
I always said, and Kenneth Angers said, "The day cinema was invented was a black day for mankind." One of my lectures is I rephrase Phyllis Diller. Films can't kill you, but why take a chance?
That's good.
But you invoked film a lot. This is great because Hollis Frampton, the great experimental filmmaker, said, "Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die." Can you forget to die?
I mean, I think we could forget about death. I think we could be distracted by life, and I don't think I'm thinking about death when I'm eating pizza. So
Yeah, you're thinking about living, like, give me another piece. That
yeah.
was good. You should see how people go, "That's a loopy question." They literally can't handle that question. But some people go, "Can you forget to die?" And they go, "Yes, I can." But
Yeah.
then they start defining death, dying, and they examine the depth of the question. But it's an interesting question because Peter Greenaway, another great filmmaker, said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. So you brought up and I come from experimental film world, and they go, "Oh, it's non-narrative or it's abstract," and blah blah blah. It's basically the question, Nick, is what's the difference between narrative and storytelling? Or how does that operate? Or compare and contrast those two
So if
things.
I think of it like a short story, like a 10-page short story, for
Yeah.
me, every single word and punctuation mark in that short story is part of the narrative, but only a select portion of it is a story that is profluent. Like that idea of when John Gardner said that profluence is what moves stories forward. Like it's an inevitable subjective thing. And so to me, narrative is bigger than story. Story is a narrow tunnel, and narrative is like the whole landscape.
Wow. Who is the Providence guy?
John Gardner,
And how do you spell his last name?
Gardner, and he got the concept from potamology, the study of rivers. So basically, I mean, water has to go somewhere, right? Like, I mean, if you stand in front of a river and you try to stop it, it's not going to go very well. So he said that, well, stories are like rivers, they keep moving. And if capturing that energy is what an artist should try to do.
That's potamology is Joyce in Finnegan's Wake. This is weird. But how do you spell this word provolence? How do you spell that?
Profuence.
What's it mean in layperson's terms?
I would say like sustained forward motion.
Ah, that's good. Yeah. So we got off on a tangent there. We're going to go back to you. How did you no, what's your tipping points to be a writer and a poet? So you're a writer of books, mainly nonfiction, right?
Now,
Your
yeah.
your books are nonfiction, but your poetry's fiction? Or is it nonfiction too? No, I love there's a key point in your Rutgers speech, really important. It's that, we're going to get there, but I don't want to do it yet. So where's the tipping? You're growing up, are parents telling you to read poetry, or are you hearing rock lyrics and going, oh, that's poetry? Where did you become aware of poetry and go, oh, I can do that?
I was always kind of afraid of academic type poetry. I was more inclined to. I really liked like the theater of mass. Um,
Oh,
and
you mean in church? You heard the church services.
yeah, I thought um, because my Catholicism as a kid was, I mean, your standard kind of immigrant Catholicism, like, like a folk piety, not like when people talk about puritanical things and rules, I don't associate that with Catholicism at all. Like, I think Catholicism is like a really kind of strange and weird art making enterprise. So, for me, like so that's how I got interested in language. And from there was a pretty direct route to poetry.
Dude, this is so amazing. Two things. You know about light through and light through and light on. That was
Mhm.
you said that without even saying it, because people hate the church now, the rape and all this. And it's like you learn things in church like stained glass windows and religious iconography. You learn art. You
Mhm.
learn choir singing, and then you learn community, like someone's parents die and the community takes care of. But we know it's got services and disservices. But the other thing is that Hermitrex guy brought up Frank Zappa. I was wondering if you brought him up, but Frank Zappa learned that the choir in his Catholic church affected the way the candles went,
Wow.
because the air shifted and the candles would move. And he said, I learned that music was uh, air molecule sculptures.
Wow. That's nice.
So that's it, and it's in his book, and I mean that's beautiful, like what you learn. But I mean, you must be torn because of what the church has become with evangelism, and it's like so 80% of people, when I ask the question, "What religion were you raised?" they go blah blah, and then I go, "Did you ever check out?" And I'm almost 90% say 13 to 18 they checked out.
That's interesting.
Oh, it's a massive, you know,
Mm.
and it's funny because I never really checked out of being raised a Roman Catholic, but I don't like go to church. but it's like I still pray.
Hmm.
So what the heck? I mean, it's like what my dad said when health food became known. We said, Dad, that has preservatives in it. And he goes, I need all the preservatives I can get. Like, why not pray? It doesn't matter if it works or not.
Yeah.
How bad is it?
Right.
But I can understand people don't want to have that picture of Jesus,
Hmm. Hmm.
So anyway, sorry to go off on tangent. Let's see. So a screenwriting teacher told me great art, great poem is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play when you're writing a poem?
I think it plays a role in the genesis of the poem. But I also think that the poem is going to take over at some point, that there's going to be something where the language connections occur. Madeline de Vries, who was a sister, a Catholic sister, a nun for I think 35 years, and then she left the convent in the 60s. She talks about growing potatoes and poetry as being similar, like what happens in the darkness underground, as being something that is essential. So I think intention, and that's part of the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical of the word craft with art, even though I saw my dad as one thing that, he had a few jobs, but one of them was a carpenter. So I see craft as being essential.
Yeah.
But I also knew that he loved mystery, so it like made it okay. So I feel like intention can suffocate sometimes, and I feel like great artists are oftentimes surprised and maybe afraid of what they create.
It's good. You get so many places I want to go because I want to go into poetry with you. But it seems as though what you did, it sounded like you go, the poem takes over. Is that anthropomorphizing the poem? Is a poem a living organism?
I think I think language is a living organism.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way that the singing in Zappa's church moved the candles, language plays with us, and
Yeah.
puns work on us and make us laugh. And, so I think in that way, I'll give liberty to the language to do the work sometimes.
Yeah. You you really brought up that word pun in one of your YouTubes. And you know that this is like I reword this like every other month. McLuhan on Joyce. Joyce uses the pun as a way of seeing the paradoxical exuberance of being through language. That's like I make it up. I go, this film festival is a way of seeing the paradoxical exuberance of, you just shift it around. Like that's what I learned from Marshall is actually aphorisms are fine, but the point is to reword them or reinvent them.
Yeah.
So his main one about metaphor, Browning, our reach should exceed our grasp. But what is a heaven for? And Mark said, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is a metaphor? Did
He
you know
was
that?
hilarious. He was funny.
That was good.
Yeah.
So Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
I want the reader to stay with me on the road, sort of, as the poem goes. And I think there's a certain care that is necessary. I would say that it's possibly dangerous to only think of one reader, like an ideal reader. I think it's what a lot of writers are taught, that you're writing towards that ideal reader, but I feel like you should write towards different people at different times. And poetry allows the inhabitation of different persona. And in that way, the persona is the audience in a strange manner. If I'm writing about something that's not me, then I have the freedom to write towards the created me. And that is what imagination does.
Yeah, this is perfect. So T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
I would say contemplation, probably, like the idea of, what fills the space when there's no stimulus, kind of. And I think poetry, a lot of the poetry that I read now, Carl Phillips and Ted Kuzer, and they do that for me, sort of.
Yeah. I love that word contemplation. Nick, honestly, just knowing you for a short time, I thought you were going to say pizza.
That too.
But one of my favorite answers was Abigail Child's experimental filmmaker. I says, "What language is your inner dialogue?" And she goes, "I wish I knew."
Yeah. Right.
It's great if you.
Yeah.
But two of my film heroes, George Manupelli's mantra is "Ignore yourself." Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, "I'm just a vehicle and this stuff comes through me." I know it's both. It's a stupid question, but is art making, poetry making, more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, culture, or environments are dominant?
I think poetry is ultimately more the self, but I think other artistic media, like nonfiction, like fiction, are the environment. I think poetry has to be intensely personal at some point.
Can art making be egoless? And then you could slice it. Can poetry making be egoless? That was good. You made that distinction too. No one's ever done that.
I think one of my best teachers, Alice Elliott Dark, she said that all great artists are self-aware assholes, which makes a lot of sense because that's what Joyce was. And he was pretty good. And I think it's dangerous, of course, to be that, but I would say, I mean, the ego is, and we only have one corporal form, I guess. So at some level, there has to be the ego present.
It's funny because I asked that question, 80% people go, no, it's got ego. One person finally said after 20 years, great art is egoless. Now, again, it's like what we're taught. But if you have this universality, and Robert Frost appeals to so many people, or some, whoever appeals to a lot of people and touching them, is that more they're tapping into a universality, a commonality, and they're letting it down? And then my smart assy question is, what was Freud right? And how would you answer that?
Well, I mean, you just mentioned Robert Frost.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite poems of his is Out, about a boy who's working, and he injures himself, basically cuts off his arm, and it's a shocking event, and it's described in quite intense detail because Robert Frost was really a very dark New England kind of. I read him as like a horror writer, basically, and when I think of that poem, and when I think of what compels me to Frost, it's his ability to capture the things that I've seen or experienced or felt, so that in a way reading is a form of recognition. And it's like comedy, you know, a lot of times a lot of comedy arrives at us not necessarily because it's, I mean, there's wordplay which is funny, but also the laughter of recognition. Like,
Yeah.
I see myself, so I feel like that is present as well.
That's really good. Gurdjieff said laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no.
That's good.
That's like, but when the kid cuts his arm off by accident or on purpose in the Frost poem.
I think it was by accident, and
Yeah.
the death, the boy, he dies shortly after, and there's like a let the dead bury their dead kind of conclusion where the town kind of moves on afterwards. So it's this incredibly dark moment, but Frost was so good at allowing us to see life in his work. And I think that's the pastoral kind of tendency of his.
Beautiful. You know, one of my favorite Frost lines is somebody goes, "Can you explain that poem?" And he says, "You mean you want me to say it worse?"
Well, that, I mean, his essay, the figure a poem makes. I even love. I mean, I love everything about that essay, but that word figure, I love that in the poetic sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you look at a page of writing, unless it's justified, you know, on both sides, like it makes a figure, right? And that's poetry rejecting the margins, literally and metaphorically. So.
Wait, you broke up a little there. When he uses the word figure, it's what is the metaphor word? Or how'd you use that?
So the idea is that the figure a poem makes is that when we think of a figure as like a body, or we think of a figure as a sculpture, like it has an outline, it has a space, and in many ways, a poem, by, you know, poetry is the rejection of mechanical margins. Most poets create that figure, and that's the figure a poem makes.
That is heavy because, see, I was trying to get to this question: what is the function of poetry? You've sort of answered it, but I'm going to ask you this. And you can go into the function of poetry if you want. Leo Bersani, he just passed away. He did a study of Mallarmé, the great symbolist poet. He said, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. That's great. I love when you crack. I got to tell you, George Carlin's daughter, I worked for George and I interviewed her. And every question I asked, she would do that. She would laugh, then she would take a deep breath, then she would answer it. So, I mean, that's really what this is all about. Having fun and laughing because these questions are stupid, really. But it is this thing. The people, I've been trying to figure out what this means for years, but it sounds like you can understand it. But you're a poetry guy, so the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. What does that mean? And
I've been trying to write a poem about berries for the last week, and I have written a lot of words that are on the periphery of the poem, and I've picked a lot of berries and eaten a lot of berries, and not picked certain berries that I think might be poisonous based on the book that I read. So I think poems a lot of times resist their composition, and that's like the sweet spot of poetry, is that I'm very skeptical of poems that arrive easily. I think they want to push it back against us because, you know, that's the mystery. And if I, you know, not that if I ever finish the berry poem, will I have it figured out, but at least I'll be able to transcribe the process of attempting to.
yeah, Gary Snyder has one too. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then bringing that seeing into language.
That's really good.
Yeah. But Rexroth nailed it. The purpose of poetry is to woo your lover and subvert the bourgeois.
That's why he liked William Everson.
Really? Tell me that. I don't know anything about Everson.
Everson was a kind of like a prototypical California pastoral poet who converted to Catholicism when he started to date Mary Fabili, who was an artist. She would play the kind of like Latin hymns as she was painting, and Everson fell in love with her and the Latin hymns, and he married her, but then shortly after became a Dominican lay brother for 16 years. And he wrote for Ramparts magazine. He was known as the beat poet. Time magazine did a feature on him. He would go to different college campuses and give speeches in his Dominican habit. And then all of a sudden in 1967 or so, at one of his poetry readings, read this intensely erotic poem and said, "I'm done." And then he went and got married.
So Everson's first name is what?
William.
Is he pre-Kerouac or a peer of Kerouac?
Around that time.
Same time.
Yeah, so his Dominican name was Brother Antoninus.
Great. Yeah, I'm in a town, Venice, California, and we're about to do a whole event on beat poetry here because it was a birthplace, one of the birthplaces. So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Knife and fork extends our teeth. Religion or philosophy might extend consciousness. It doesn't have to be tangible. What does the writing utensil extend for you, whether it's a keyboard or a pencil or a pen? What humanness is extended?
Journeying without physically moving, like the idea that I can go just about anywhere and be seated, and I like that.
Do you know when they said, what do films extend? Everybody goes memory, eyes. McLuhan said the foot.
It's great.
That's you're saying the writing utensil extends your foot.
Yeah.
That's good. So we could do a lecture called Poetry as Film.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch, not, it doesn't have to be anthropology or Herzog or the New York article he based his film on, just your hunch.
When we see something amazing, we want to keep it past the moment when we see it.
Yeah.
So it's why I took a photo of the sky like 2 hours ago. It's, it's the same thing, I think.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I don't think there's authentic compromise without having convictions. So
Wait, you can't have authentic compromise without having a conviction?
Without having a worldview or a belief.
Yeah. Nick, this is really fun. I appreciate it. Is ambition based more on fear or joy?
I think fear. I think in my section of the world, like in literature and in writing, ambition is pretty rampant, and there's a competitive kind of element to it.
Yeah. So that question I worded that way for 25 years, and then I switched it because I read William Friedkin, who's really articulate. Have you ever seen? I've seen him speak. He's really sharp thinker, and so I changed it to this. You've accomplished a lot, family, books, career. how do you rate these three elements in your accomplishments? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I see ambition as like the extreme desire to accomplish something, not necessarily external to the self.
Yeah.
So I'm someone who runs a lot, and I have to explain to people who hate running why I would go in the woods and run for miles and miles and miles. So I feel like there's a self flagellation element to running and Catholicism and writing, and they all go pretty well together. So I would say some measure of ambition and determination, and I think luck opens the doors through which, if one has some measure of skill, you can perform.
Yeah, that's good. Gary Player, the golfer, says the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Mm-hmm.
But you know why? That's funny you put ambition first, because, and I understand what you sussed it out. It's bigger than what people think. Friedkin said, in Hollywood, luck and skill have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Is perception reality?
Yeah, because I don't think we have any true ultimate verification of reality outside of perceiving it.
Yeah, that's Lily Tomlin said, reality's a collective hunch.
That's good.
That is. McLuhan Probe Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce saying, artists dream awake. We all have these creative powers that, everybody can create these scenarios in the middle of the night. And not to sound elitist, but artists can actually also do that while they're awake. Have dreams played a role in your creative process?
Oh, absolutely. I in the research, in the kind of archival research that I do for most of my non-academic nonfiction tends to be narrative nonfiction about horror, like exorcisms and hauntings and those kind of things. So I'm constantly reading case studies, old documents, declassified CIA materials. I'm always reading like really scary, weird stuff, and it finds its way into my dreams. And that works with the awake me. Like there's a symbiotic relationship between those two things, and I love to sleep, and I'm looking forward to sleeping, and I think it's a beautiful part of existence.
It's amazing. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know what they are though. I always
That's Sun Ra was in New Yorker recently. He said, the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change.
Right.
That was a great answer. Let's leave it at that. So tell me Nick, one major element of your creativeness, whether it's nonfiction, poetry, teaching, running, one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been doing this.
Okay. What stayed the same is being really interested in unusual methods of storytelling and unusual stories. So the best reading experience I had in college was reading The Peterson Kid, which is a novella by William H. Gass, who was a philosophy professor at the Washington University of St. Louis, but was really a fiction writer. And The Peterson Kid is a story about an absolutely brutal blizzard and a child that shows up on the doorstep of a family in rural Dakota. And they kind of bring the child back to life. And then they try to figure out who left the baby in the middle of a blizzard. And they go out in the storm. And William Gass describes the storm for like 65 pages. He could have done it probably in 3, but that's exactly why he did it in 65. So that unusual oddity found its way into my brain because when I read the preface to his book, in which the Pearson Kid is in, he was talking about a story as a toothache for him. And I read it in a dentist waiting room in Pennsylvania when I was in college. And that just clicked for me. So I look for like patterns, and that was the pattern forming for me. One thing that's changed is I don't think of academic writing as very separate from creative writing. And I think the best criticism or critical writing is performative, creative.
It's good. I've got to interject this one thing. We didn't get into it, but Robert Dobbs says McLuhan converted to Catholicism as a performance art piece. You ever heard that?
I haven't, but that, based on what I know of Bob Dobbs, that sounds accurate.
But it is really an amazing statement, because that's probably what Marshall was doing, but he didn't know. I mean, his mom was like a performance artist.
Of course, elocutionist.
So
yeah.
Could have been,
Yeah. And he also, he liked, I mean, there's that great image in The Medium is the Massage where he and Quentin Fiore took a photo of Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable show and put the right words in the rote order from Finnegan's on that image. Like, that is McLuhan winking his way into history, I think.
Dude, you're deep, because that's, both Marshall and Andy says art is anything you can get away with. And my friend said, that sounds like Trump.
A little bit.
But I loved your giving the nod to Quentin, and that's the beauty of Marshall. All his books were like, Edmund Carpenter, they all made big contributions. And yeah, and I loved you saying the method and the story, both the form and the content. Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people?
I've not read more than a few sentences out loud.
But you've read the whole book, or you never read it?
I read the whole book in graduate school, but I did not.
To yourself?
Oh, not aloud.
To yourself. You read the whole Finnegan's Wake?
Yes, but I remember 1/100th of what I remember of Ulysses. Ulysses was the
right,
one.
Right, Ulysses is your,
yeah.
you got, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. Rather, we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Overactive imagination, creating stories of actions for people and allowing them to evolve like fictional characters, but training myself to tether that to reality. If it's not controlled, of course, you can become paranoid, but if it is controlled, then you can be empathetic.
Yeah, I collected that whole page full of what is paranoia. That what you just said was, so I asked for 90 minutes. We got 10 more minutes. Can you go a little longer?
Sure.
How many more minutes? 10, 15, 20? Just give me
Want to say 15?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Perfect. This really been fun. You really got it. Thanks. So Anger can be a productive emotion
when it results in some sort of a creation or improvement rather than just destruction.
Yeah. This question I'm still struggling with, but I'm going to lay out how it evolved. The question is, can satire be destructive? Well, it's evident it can be destructive. If you do a cartoon in a country and they kill you, some people think death is destructive.
Right.
But Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own.
Mm.
And my friend who wrote with Robin Williams said, can satire be destructive? He says, that's the job of satire.
Mm.
But, you know, again, it's sussing out what the words mean. So tell me how you navigate satire in your consuming it and in whether you utilize it. What is satire and what does it mean? What's the tool for you?
One of my favorite novels is a satirical novel, The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. And it's my favorite book of his. It might be my favorite novel really ever. And it's a satirical story of a suburban housewife in California who may or may not be participating in a psychotropic drug study via her psychiatrist, but is definitely participating in a postal conspiracy that goes back to like the 14th century in Europe. And it's such a strange book. And it's the kind of book that a kind of, I mean, because Pynchon was Catholic, a quite ardent one, apparently, even when he was at Cornell. It's a kind of book that a trickster Catholic would write because Catholicism is very big picture. It's enormous picture, right? It's always thinking of connections and patterns, and it's a willingness to suspend disbelief pretty significantly. So I think satire, in order to appreciate it, it has to be really, really good. So, for example, Don DeLillo, my favorite book of his is the novel End Zone, which is a satire of college football. And he wrote it in the early 1970s. And there's no way he could have written that book without absolutely loving football and loving the language of football and the language of sports. So satire for me comes from a place of fascination and love, because to have the marathon legs to do it and to do it right, you've got to embed yourself in that place. So I think satire is actually a really healthy thing.
Amazing. You know, Bob Dobbs says another great thing about Frank Zappa. He says, Frank reverently satirized what he loved. So he loved black music and he satirized it. And so then people get the wrong idea. If you write a song called Nigger Business, people are going, what? And he blackfaced himself on an album cover. And they're like, whoa. So that leads perfectly into this question. But first, what'd you think of Inherent Vice, the movie? A thumbs up or down?
Would you believe I haven't seen it yet?
Oh my God. Yeah. You know John Bishop, the Book of the Dark? The guy who wrote one of the best books on Finnegan's Wake.
No.
Oh, you should check it out. John Bishop is one of the key Wakeans of all time. And I interviewed him with all these questions, and he taught Pynchon at Berkeley besides teaching the Wake. Yeah. Pynchon comes up a lot. So the question is, you create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Nick. I'm saying one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Buñuel nailed it. Thank God I'm an atheist. So So your take on this, you create what you resist. What's your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I love that you quote from Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which I
Yeah.
think is like it's a Joyce that people have to read. And it's labor intensive. And I think I mean, with all those hell sermons, it had to go the way that he wrote it. I think that, I mean, when we hate someone, I'm pretty sure that we love them and we hate how much we love them. You know, there's a rejection that compels us. It's inevitable. If they occupy that space in our world, they matter to us.
Is hating more innate or more invented? Is it innate in humans or is it invented by humans?
I think it's innate. I don't know if it's a good thing that it's innate, but I think at some level it is, because we're we are competitive at some level.
Yeah.
And that's why we love games and sports, right?
You like just help me so well lead one question in the next. Go. This is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who a hero is and who is not.
That's really good.
That's an amazing statement. So this guy told me the other day, villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom.
Mm.
So two questions. First one is competition, well, you probably already said it. Is competition more innate or more invented? Is
I think
being competitive more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Does punishment work?
not in the way we think it does.
What does that mean?
um,
You mean we invented punishment and we think it works, but it really doesn't work because, like I always say, if the criminal gets caught, do they go, "Dang, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day," or did they go, "Dang, I was doing something morally or
right,
socially wrong"?
right. It's yeah. It's not the way. I don't think it works in the way that we envision it does.
Yeah. What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
Seeing beyond the literal, I think women see environment, men see, like, if there's a person standing in front of you, I feel like a woman sees aura, whereas a man sees literal body.
That's good. I had to drop that question because so many people would go, won't go there because of, me too. And I says, I'm bringing it back.
Mm.
I brought it back, and you didn't hesitate.
Mm.
But that's funny because there's a cliche I love. It's called "Women know, men suppose."
That's
That's
good.
sort of what you're saying. Women know because they see the aura.
Mm.
Um, and then the word. This is a theory. I'm not believe it, but the word mafia begins with the letters M-A, ma,
Mm.
because women run the world, but they let men think they run the world.
Yeah,
You think that?
that's accurate.
I said that to a woman at one of our Finnegan's Wake reading clubs. She goes, "Don't tell people that." She goes, "Don't reveal our secret."
That's funny.
What caused matriarchy?
The desire to be cared for and to be comforted, I think, is something that we all have, and I think in some forms that arises from that.
that the woman tapped into that desire and said, I'm going to lead the tribe? Or who's the desire to be cared for and comfortable? That's the men saying that, or the women, or everybody?
I think it's everyone.
Everyone. That
Yeah.
caused that the women giving birth will let them be the ruler.
Mhm.
Or the, yeah. Eric McLuhan said, I says, what caused matriarchy? He says, men. You know what else? I talked to Eric about this. I forgot what he said, but Andrew Crystal told me, and it's true. Marshall said that Finnegan's Wake was a black mass.
Mhm.
But black mass is a satirical thing, isn't it? How is
Yeah, well,
Finnegan? You nodded your head. Had you ever heard that Marshall said that?
yeah. So I think the concept of black mass, at least I think the way McLuhan infers or interprets it, is a parodic or subversive representation of Catholic ritual. Um, in other contexts, black mass has a more kind of nefarious uh, sort of framing. But I think for McLuhan, um, Joyce, because you quoted the supersaturated line, Joyce was probably the most intensely Catholic writer of the last 150. I mean, is he's so Catholic, it's almost overwhelming.
That's you are what you hate, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's Zappa, that's Buñuel, that's a lot of artists. They
and
create what they
yeah,
resist. So
and
that's
but
what you mean.
and Joyce went to Holy Saturday Mass his whole life, and his brother said, "Don't ask him to do anything during Holy Week because James is going to be at Mass, at church. Like it was his. He could not
He
resist
felt
it.
duty. That's
Yeah,
like, do you know that story where a marshal's getting hired to lecture GM or General Electric guys, and he goes, "Oh, it's noon. I got to go to church." And all these guys went to church with them.
that's
We're
great.
trying to sell cars here, and oh, you mean there's going to be some special epiphany I'm going to add how to sell a car now? How do you find peace of mind?
Trying to separate the present moment from a more like eternal perspective or a longer perspective. I feel like the present is entertaining, but it's also it shades kind of the truth and reality. So you have to be able to kind of pause the movie a little bit.
So you find it by pausing and
Mhm.
be here now.
I would say reading poetry. I would say running. I would say
Yeah.
you know those kind of things are effective.
You said the word truth. Buñuel said, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, everybody agrees with that, Nick, except one guy goes, that's bullshit. Why do you seek the truth if you're not going to find it? So the real hidden question there is, if the cliche goes, the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name a destination or seek a destination if the journey is more important?
Right. Well, that I mean that's another line from the moviegoer, that novel I mentioned before. Walker Percy, the main character Binks, says that 98. I mean, the novel was written in 1960, so he says the Gallup poll said that 98% of people believe in God and 2% are agnostic or atheist, and that there's no percentage for a seeker. And um, there's a scene later in the book where he has all these kind of family problems, and he goes to church or outside. He's parked outside of a church on Ash Wednesday, and a black man steps out of the church, and Binks, the character, says he was kind of far away from the guy, and he said he couldn't see if the man got ashes or not. And the question was, had he had the man sought some sort of like spiritual fulfillment, or had Binks projected that onto the man? And then Binks comes to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter. Like, both of those are acceptable sort of outcomes.
It's really good. Did that book ever get made into a film?
I don't know for sure. I don't think so. I think it's a little.
I have to read that. The way you
Yeah.
describe it, I would love you to just give me a seminar on it. It's an amazing book. I know about it, but I've never read it. But again, I can read it. So the Beefheart poem you evoked is amazing. The stars are matter, we are matter, but it doesn't matter. How's that for being poetry?
That's good.
Dada Rockstar, Captain Beefheart. These are 5 quick questions from Alan Watts, just in a few words off the top of your head. 1, who started it all?
God.
Are we going to make it?
Yeah.
Where do we put it?
Where it goes.
Who's cleaning it up?
Hopefully somebody.
Is it serious?
No. The Lord of the Absurd, like Father Raymond Nogar said.
What did he say?
He said that his God is the God of the absurd.
That's good. Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I think over.
Why?
There's a natural gravitational tendency in that way.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Write more of it down.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Pizza and Exorcisms.
They want to scent the glue and the binding. What smell?
Maple syrup.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
In a forest and made of branches.
Beautiful. Tell me something good you never had, but you never want.
I've never had oysters, but people say they're good.
They're good. You never had it and you never want it. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I say you can't get any worse already.
I'm intrigued by your interest in nuns. You know, I sort of had a crush on one of my nuns in when I was like a 8th grade or something, but we really connected, and she had a big influence on my life. And I was curious, your interest in studying these poems, these poets that were nuns, and your pursuit in that, and especially you could discuss that for a minute or so. But have you seen the movie Inquiring Nuns? Do you know about it?
I do not.
Dude, watch the trailer. It's an amazing film. So the key guy in French documentary making and film theorist was Jean Rouch, who said an amazing thing. He says, if you put a camera between me and you, it's more real than it's like us. This is more real than if we were in a room, because our eyes would be wandering and we'd be, and it's amazing that he said that. And he sort of, Chronicles of Summer was one of the first films that you had the on the street questionnaire. And these guys who made Hoop Dreams, Their first project was Inquiring Nuns in 68.
Oh, wow.
And it's 2 nuns on the street in Chicago asking questions.
Wow.
Just watch the trailer. It is amazing. I mean, I haven't seen the whole film, but just to watch the trailer, it's amazing how people will open up like
Hmm.
that. But
Yeah.
your interest, just briefly, what attracted you to that? Because you've had this vast thing. You go to McLuhan, you go
Hmm.
exorcism, pizza, berry picking, what running through the woods.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did that German, start?
So as I was reading, I read a lot of archived literary magazines, things like the Kenyon Review, the Missouri Review, poetry. These are quarterly publications that have been around, some of them for over 100 years. And I noticed that in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, as you go through like the contributor bios, a lot of these people had the word sister in front of their name. And I said to myself, well, why is that happening? So I read their poems and I read their bios, and I discovered that a significant literary kind of renaissance was happening back then, where women who were sisters and contemplative nuns were steeped in intellectual and artistic uh, places, and they were teachers and they were writers and scholars, and they wrote really cool poetry, and they were highly educated women, at a time when maybe not so many of their peers were able to go to school in that way. And it was like this perfect alchemy to create art, where they had the tension of being not out in the secular world, but being represented in it artistically. And it doesn't exist like that anymore. So I tried to kind of figure out what was going on during that moment, and that's the thing that I've been writing recently.
That's beautiful. I look forward to that because I want to invite you. We're going to have a poetry salon with a couple other poets down the road a couple months from now. And I'd love to have you there because when you said cool poetry, that's, that's like, yeah, well, what's cool? Like, Oscar Wilde, bad poetry still, his quote about bad poetry still has sincere feelings.
That's right.
Like, it's like experimental film and poetry are the same thing. Like, who's judging if it's, if it's a free for all, like, and why isn't computers making experimental films and poetry? And people are like, that's great. And they can. But my friend has the 3 T's in music: taste, theory, and technique. So, theory, you can learn how to do grammar. Technique is, how to write the words on the page. But how does one acquire taste in poetry? Like, how do you say, well, that's cool poetry, that's not cool poetry?
Right.
So we'll tackle that if you want to join us.
Mm-hmm.
Couple more and we're out of here.
Okay.
What's the cultural shift today that inspires you?
I kind of like that people are paying attention to the 80s, because I feel like the 80s were a comfortingly strange time. Like, when I think of video stores and places like that, I feel like those were magic places. We don't have them anymore, but I feel like there's a rejuvenated interest in it, because video stores were like libraries for movies, basically. And
Yeah.
I feel like people are into that again. And who knows, maybe we'll go in that direction a little bit more.
Is it like fandom? Or
In a way, I think it's nostalgia, and I
yeah,
think it's people being open to the power of nostalgia as being something that's formative.
it's good. Joseph Beuys, artist. You know this guy? He wrote his own chapter to Finnegan's Wake. He said, "Make the
I think I heard of it.
secrets." He said, "Make the secrets productive." Lou Welsh, beat poet, said, "Guard the secrets, constantly reveal them." But Thornton Wilder, total Finnegan's Wake freak, 1928, said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret. It's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes, Nick. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I think there's got to be something more than the material world. And I don't have to find it, but I want to like push at the border a little bit.
In you mean that's non-physical? What? How do you say material world? Non-verbal, non-physical? What's suss out what that means?
Non-physical, that maybe language has an incantory alchemic possibility as well.
Is it ESP?
It might be.
Yeah. What gives you the most optimism?
The cyclical nature of days and seasons and liturgy.
The cyclical nature is that, that everything just keeps going.
It's gonna. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna. I mean, at least here in New Jersey, it's gonna be 95 in a few days, but it's also gonna be snowing in a few months, and I like that.
Yeah. The cyclical. That's cool. I used to have this question: is human progress more cyclical or more cumulative?
Cyclical. McLuhan would say is cyclical, right?
Well, I say I think it's a cone. It goes in circles up, and then sometimes it goes down.
Yeah.
Nick, what a pleasure, man. I learned a lot, and you're a smart guy. I appreciate your time and energy. Really super. I hope we can do this again. I hit and brought, and I hope our carry on forever and ever.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.